Hello, good morning. Welcome to Sunrise Daily today. I'm Chamberlain Oso.
It's a beautiful Wednesday morning, a bit dewy, but lovely nonetheless. Good morning and welcome. I'm Malkwe Ogun Yusuf.
And it seems like, a morning that is defying all that we're taught about weather in school. It's turning out to be another wet August morning. Good morning and welcome. I am Bukola Koka.
Someone doesn't quite love the rain, but hey, let's bring you some sunshine, shall we? Welcome to Sunrise Daily from here in Lagos. I'm Kayode Okikiolu. I know a lot of people must have seen that story, those videos online about the aircraft that crashed in the Oba Akran area of Lagos State. It was quite shocking for a lot of people. They were thinking, is this an old story? Is this new? What is going on here? Well, yes, it indeed happened. The Lagos State governor has visited. In fact, the NSIB, we understand, has commenced investigation into that accident. That's the Nigerian Safety Investigation Bureau. So you see scenes from that accident just right after it happened. I mean, seeing the video of when the aircraft hit the road, it was just, intriguing to see how people scampered for safety. You'd understand that safety is always key, but as usual, lots of questions are being raised. I mean, we just came off a series of reports about the aviation sector, how, issues of regulation, safety, aviation fuel, and all of that have been major talking points. And I mean, this is a major sector when it comes to any economy, really. Yes, there have been challenges from COVID-19 around the world, but particularly for the Nigerian aviation sector, it looks like some of these challenges have lingered. I mean, we can't talk about funding enough, the issues about, need for funds, better infrastructure. I mean, we're just talking about the lights, the runway lights that were stolen just weeks ago. So it looks like the aviation sector has a lot going for it right now. And you know why this is important. This is meant to be a highly regulated industry because you know how important these birds are. It's not just when they're in the air. It is what happens before they, go into the air that actually matters. Issues of regulation, safety, and all of that. And lots of questions will be asked, of course, about this particular incident. What exactly happened? From what we gather, this particular flight, Jabiru J430, with nationality and registration marks 5NCCQ, was on a test flight within Lagos, and there were 2 passengers on board. Thankfully, they were rescued by first responders who incidentally were civilians. And I remember the governor of Lagos State actually mentioning their names. 2 of them who responded first tried to get water or something to douse the fire. But questions about safety. What exactly went wrong? Because you can imagine the kind of signal this would send to a lot of people right in the afternoon, just about 3 p.m. or thereabouts. So was it 3 p.m. if I'm correct?
Yes, that's the video. Yes,
again, see the video
on your screen.
I mean, it just sends chills down your spine watching that, thinking what could have happened. I know a lot of people have said maybe the pilot was even very careful trying to avoid vehicles or trying to steer, the aircraft right. But we need to answer questions about safety because there's been too many talks about the aviation sector and possible things that may go wrong. We don't have a Minister of Aviation yet. We're not even sure if there'll be a Ministry of Aviation, if there'll be a merging and it will still remain the same. Still questions from the previous Minister of Aviation or for him to answer about Nigeria Air. I mean, we can't talk enough about the aviation industry. Maybe this is a wake-up call for us to pay attention to those things, Bukola.
Yes, indeed. You just reminded us yet again about the investigation conducted by the House Committee on Aviation in the 9th Assembly, I believe, Kayode, and, the Senate Committee as well, judging the process, of Nigeria Air under the former minister as highly questionable. So it's true that, the industry is really regulated. And we're waiting the outcome of that. And only recently as well, I believe regulatory authorities had cause to suspend operations of Max Air due to the discovery of, what do they call it now, adulterated fuel, watering Jet A1 fuel, and the concerns about the risk to safety. That aircraft crash yesterday indeed sent shockwaves down my spine when I heard about it. You know, it was reminiscent of that aircraft crash. I can't recall the name now, sometime in 2013 or 2012, that crashed into a residential area. So when I heard that this was somewhere close to a residential area, my worries, you know, increased. But thankfully, it was not, you know, as grievous as we, you know, thought it could have been. And kudos to those citizens of the residential area that responded and were gallant enough to help save lives. And we understand that the occupants of the aircraft have been, you know, rushed to the hospital and are under observation. But it is also significant to note that most aircraft crashes have been adjudged to be as a result of human error rather than mechanical error. So it's too early in the in the life of a new administration to be recording about the second aircraft crash. Recall the one in Benue, which thankfully as well, the lives of the 2 pilots on board were saved. So we hope that this will be nipped in the bud. Regulatory authorities should look into the quality of experience of those, you know, who are flying these aircraft. And of course, the diligence of those who are supposed to be flying these aircraft, you know, to check for every form of mechanical error before those birds, you know, as Kayode described them, are made to fly in the air. Malpe.
Well, nothing left to add. I can only say that, you know, it's very rare that we usually have, you know, stories of crashes with many bright spots. This story certainly has many bright spots. The fact that that aircraft didn't hit anyone on the ground, thankfully. I mean, we saw almost everybody there scampering for safety. And thankfully, nobody was hit, no car was affected. I certainly saw God's hand in it. Look at that. I mean, and there were cars on the road, a few cars on the road. So you cannot say, oh, and look, you even see popular Okada riders. They're also there as well, individuals walking as well. Thankfully, none of these people were affected. That's certainly, you know, certainly something to celebrate. Then you also hear that the people who were in the aircraft as well were rescued by Nigerians. I'm also very grateful that the first responders gave due credit to the community. They acknowledged the efforts that the community put in to help those people out of the aircraft even before they got there. They explained why they had received a distress call and they had been on their merry way to the airport before, you know, before they heard that, oh, the crash actually happened in Oba Akram. But before they got there, the citizens and the community already did the job. I mean, so many bright things. And eventually they were able to get the victims of that particular crash to a hospital, a military hospital, we understand. So prayerfully, that will be the third thing I'm waiting for now, that those people actually survived, you know, with very little impact to their body, bones, and mind. So I'm hoping that that will be the miracle that we'll eventually record. So 3 miracles in one day, I really cannot complain. Of course, in addition to all of the other safety you know, issues that you have raised, we will look forward to how, you know, the AIB handles that and what recommendations that they will make. But this is what we currently have, and we hope that that eventually, you know, that eventually remains the case. We still have many more to celebrate in this particular incident. Chamberlain.
Well, yes, we can blow our cheeks out and say, thankfully, no lives lost. But it only gets to remind us all that air transport safety, I mean, in this particular case, because of this incident, we have to ramp it up a lot more, because even the incident involving the investigation going on concerning Max Air, you won't believe what some tell us, that some persons there are actually negotiating, trying to intervene on behalf of certain persons, asking you to just cut them some slack, let them go, give it a slap on the wrist, and you cannot believe it. But we get to see this. Enforcing standards and rules is for the benefit of everybody. So those agencies there, whatever challenges they have, if they cannot meet up, they need to speak up, because we need to give a lot more premium to human lives. And this particular case, look, there's a litany of challenges in that aviation industry. Many ask, can we really say we have an aviation industry in the true sense of the word, given what we go through on a regular basis? I'll leave you to mull on that one. Well, today could be a significant day, whichever way you look at it, because, okay, take a look. Let's start with The Guardian as we take you through some of the dailies here this morning. Rising hardship. NLC defies truce, proceeds on nationwide protest. So, after a lot of back and forth, this is happening today. That's what Labour and civil society groups have told us. But we will, of course, keep tabs on that one for you. Yesterday is the big lead on the front page here. But you could also see several images of the incident we highlighted in our opening sequence here this morning about the small airplane crash, which they say was on a test run and had a passenger on board and was about to make an emergency landing before it hit a pole, and then the rest is history. So I don't know what we have to do and how we should approach handling or how we conduct ourselves at rescue or emergency scenes or accident scenes, because if they wanted to have a lot of forensics, I think they'll have a lot of headache. With all of persons trampling at those places. Yes, it's good people, first responders, rescue people, but there are just so many things. If they were waiting for the official responders to get there, could they have gotten there in good time? Could they have accessed them? Could they have gotten worse? So, who knows? Who knows? But that's the big lead on the front page of the, The Guardian today.
Okay, let's take a look at leadership for you now. You see right there on the front page, palliatives. Labour begins nationwide protest. Federal government declares action illegal. You can let us know what the situation is like, your own location. What are you seeing? If you're on the road, that is, if you're going to work. Because on my way to work this morning, the road seemed rather empty, almost like as if people were either preparing to join the protest. You never can tell what can happen much later, or maybe they were just not. But the roads were just not as busy as had been seen.
I think people are working from home now.
No, come on, Timberling. I mean, on Monday and Tuesday, the roads were at least, there was significant traffic.
Monday, Tuesday, Friday. Some make it Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. So they vary. Different companies vary. So, yeah.
Possibly. But then, even then, I mean, when I compare what I see or what I saw on Monday and Tuesday, the roads looked rather empty. Almost like
depending on what part of the road you're coming through, actually.
Almost like as if people were, maintaining some cautiousness around the process as supposed to start today. That was my own reading of it. But that was what I noticed. So you can let us know if you're on your way to work. If not, if you intend to stay at home. If you're working from home, you can also let us know.
Happy working day from home.
Yes, it's also possible that offices have told their members of staff to work from home today. It's also a possibility. But that is if they're not, after all, Labour, Labour, they're supposed to be taken from the working class, right? So if people are going to protest, it's the working class that will go out to protest, right? So we'll see what happens eventually today. Maybe they were prepping for the protest, which is to begin later today. But this is what you find on the front page there. Labour begins nationwide protest. Federal government declares action illegal. Upon what basis, precisely? Well, you might want to read page 4 to find out the basis upon which the federal government says the action is illegal. IGP beefs up security, warns against violence, reps to monitor palliatives implementation. That's also there for you. And just what we focused on, the crash that happened in Lagos. Everyone says it's a helicopter, but it looks like a light aircraft.
No, it's not a helicopter.
So, I don't know. Maybe there are different kinds of helicopter.
No,
we usually know that a helicopter has its blades on top of the plane and, it's roving like that. But I don't know. I think the AIB will eventually help us. Maybe we are mixing something up. But look at it. The remains of a helicopter that crashed over Accra.
Some days even say 4 persons.
So I don't know. Accounts. And then you also heard the governor there saying a helicopter. So even though... So I don't know. As I said, let's wait for the AIB to tell us
and then aviation experts call us and say, no, guys, it's not.
It's a light aircraft.
It's up to them to go and tell us.
There's a little plane. It looks like a little plane to me, a really little plane. We have a number of other stories right there. MAN, that's the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, wants tougher legislations on illegal mining. That's what you see on the front page right there. What they're aiming at, you might see the story on page 4. I know that there's also something to protect artisanal miners, but then you also have companies coming in droves these days, especially foreigners who are preying on the land, and they'll just buy up farmlands. You think they want to farm, but that's not what they want to do. They're actually buying up those pieces of land because they want to mine. They know what is underneath the ground, and it looks like government doesn't quite have a handle on it, or perhaps they're complicit. So MAN is raising attention on that. Page 4 is where you get details. Senate to send petitions against nominees to security agencies. We heard that yesterday during the screening. We didn't know that there were any other, but hey, page 7, let me not get ahead of myself. Tribunal reserves judgment in Atiku Obi's petitions. That's also there as well. And we'll leave it there for leadership newspapers.
And take a look at Daily Independent this morning, which also trails on Labour's proposed mass action. This is the big story. Fuel subsidy removal. Nationwide mass protest starts today. Labour insists. Listen to the riders. Says, what FG has put on table as palliative, not enough. Indeed, we heard the president of the TUC say yesterday that indeed, if the federal government says it has saved 1 trillion naira from fuel subsidy, then it is important for Labour to push its demand at least close to that mark. I'm not quoting him copiously now.
I think the government deserves that, because if you just say you saved 1 trillion naira without being explicit, people will naturally think there's some 1 trillion naira you saved. So this is what the government gets for not being clear. Is that actually the 1 trillion naira, or you're saying, well, we could have spent 1 trillion naira on this 1 trillion which we didn't have anyway. But we'll have found a way to get it. So government needs to be clear. But hey, let me keep the gunpowder dry. We'll get into that this morning.
Indeed, Kayode. I'm supposed to go ahead with that, but I won't follow up with that as well. I won't take that cue until later on. Perfects mobilization from state affiliate unions, and police warn against violent protests, order watertight security. But what are we hearing about some states not going ahead with this strike because of state interventions in the area of palliatives? Let's know what's happening in your state, as Marquez said earlier. But take a look at this one. Listen to this. It's above the nameplate. Debtors now use third parties to mask assets. AMCON cries out. There are just 2 riders there, but they're just as informative. Recovers 1.6 trillion naira debt in 10 years, says over 84% of debt owed by 350 obligators. Now, that's pretty interesting. If you're looking for details, I guess you find them on the inside pages. This is not quite clear, but third parties to mask assets, that's an interesting revelation. And the whole AMCON intervention into, dependent assets has been criticized as, giving us an economy on crutches rather than economy that is growing. But let's leave it there for Daily Independent.
Nigerian Tribune is next, as you'd expect. This is the lead story. IGP talks tough as NLC, TUC gear up for protests. This is the day, in fact. We understand that it should be beginning anytime soon. But take a look at riders. Again, government moves to avert protest. Labour says no going back. Protest commences 7:30 a.m. today nationwide. That's in exactly 10 minutes. You see, Lagos transporters won't join. That's from MC Oluomo. So page 5, intrigues as well.
What's his designation again? MC Oluomo.
More details on the inside pages of that story. I know the Lagos State government had created something.
Just wondering if he's a spokesperson of government, in what capacity he's speaking.
Or at least some part of Labour, some section of Labour, maybe Lagos transporters. Page 5 has more details on that story. And of course, the picture shows scenes from that crash yesterday. Certainly, the Jabiru, I think J430 is not a helicopter. Certainly not a helicopter. It's an aircraft, right? Quite all right, but not a helicopter. That's a J430. And you see, just right next to it, PEPC reserves judgment in Atiku Obi's case. So we'll just keep our eyes on the appeal court or the presidential election petitions court for when the judgment will be given. They have done their bit, that's the lawyers, and it's time for judgment. But we don't know what the date is. But of course, we'll let you know as soon as the court decides on that one. Just one more for you, and this is what it is. Military can't handle Nigerian problem. Agbaji, political scientist. So there's still that going on. And we'll leave it there for the Nigerian Tribune.
Or take a look at New Telegraph next. NLC to Nigerians. We have no reason to suspend nationwide protest. And then they've got a lot of riders here this morning. The first of which says, IGP orders security beef up countrywide. Vows to deal with, quote, miscreants. Okay. NLC, Tinubu's promises misalign with current hardship in Nigeria. Falls wage review partnership. Part of the statement, the issues. I guess that's where they get this from. FG can come up with better interventions. Ascribed to TUC. Demands wage awards instead of minimum wage increase. Okay, you may need to understand the context if you get to the paper. And then the last of which says, Oyo protesters beat up civil servants, lock secretariat offices. Again, I like it to get context so you'll understand, because you'll have thought, look, who are they protesting for? Who are those who immediately benefit from this? And isn't it civil service? So why would they beat up civil servants? Or is it some civil servants who are trying to do something at the scene? Is it a general mindset about civil service? I don't know. It's all here for you to go ahead and find out why that is the case. But above that lead story here, FG's levy cuts vehicle import by 47% to 1.12 trillion naira. And then you get to see customs to engage government. So what is this levy about? How is he cutting this? And it's all here. It is all here. And sometimes you need to see how you can keep tabs with all of this, because one policy is out and then you think you're about to take advantage, and before you know what's happening, before you complete your process, haven't begun the process, as a result of that, it's over, and then you're back to square one if you are importing items, and then you get caught up with all of those. So, who knows? But at the bottom straight, Niger were prepared for any presidential directive. Military. Don't send troops to Niger. General Williams cautions Tinubu. So I think we need to, part of what some of them are saying, I think even I saw a statement too from Mr. Fallon warning ECOWAS leaders against attacking the Niger Republic. That might be from a legal perspective. Now, from this military standpoint, you get to see all of this. So clearly, we need to examine all the options before we eventually settle for the very last option, if we have to. That's the New Telegraph.
Well, Daily Trust has this. Police on alert as Labour begins protest nationwide. So it looks like everyone is focusing on the protest that should happen today. Dispersed anti-subsidy protest in Kano. Workers adamant in Oyo. So it appears that in a number of places, the protest already started before the day which was earmarked for it. So they have pictures to that effect showing you what happened in Kano yesterday, and also in Oyo State as well. That's at the Oyo State Secretariat. You also see right there, okay, well, the writer says, union insists on fuel subsidy, school fees reversal, others. We know they'll listen to us, that's according to Gwajabia Mila. You find details on pages 4 and 8 of the paper. A number of other stories, look at the bottom here. Legal fireworks, that's tribunal set to rule on Tinubu's election. I scored 25% in above half of FCT. Okay, that's a fresh one. That's according to Tinubu. IREV, part of the electoral process. 355 billion naira spent on it. That's according to Atiku and Obi. Petitioners couldn't prove claim on electronic collation of results. That's according to INEC. So summarizing essentially some of the interesting, you know, perhaps...
That's what it costs to decide, actually.
Yeah, interesting pieces of information which journalists were able to gather. What do you think might interest you? Page 10 is where you get, I don't want to say juicy details, it's not gossip, it's a news report, but that's where you get all of the gist. You get it, right? Okay, so just beneath the nameplate, you have a number of other stories as well. UK announces £10 million facility to support food security in Nigeria. Subsidy, marketers selling filling stations over poor sales profit. That's according to Ipman. Yes, I've already seen 1 or 2 stations which used to be for an independent marketer, now being taken over by the NNPC. So, yeah, page 25, that's a tough lock to some of the independent marketers there. And you also have this helicopter controversy again to rescue. This helicopter crashes into a building in Lagos. Well, page 8 is where you get details. Let's leave it there for Daily Trust newspapers.
And turn to this Nigeria, which also leads with Labour's decision to go ahead with the strike, but you know, it's pretty much rendered in a different way. Strike, FG pleads with Labour to sheath sword. No going back. Palliative insignificant, that's ascribed to NLC, TUC, as IGP expresses concern, warns against violent protests. And the picture inset there, you know, captures a scene at a helicopter crash in Oba Akron yesterday with the governor there to see things for himself. Let's go to the top of the nameplate. You'll see this one. We'll soon amend CBN Act to make it accountable, says Akpabio, the Senate president. And a few more stories for you before we exit this Nigeria. Vandalism, that's going closer to the bottom strip. FG orders 24-hour surveillance on Second Niger Bridge. That's an increasing concern, and we had cause to talk about it on the program sometime last week. And we hope that those who have a penchant for vandalizing government property to desist from it, as it's a collective commonwealth. And lastly, just as concerning, Southeasterners lost 2.8 trillion naira to bandits, others in 3 years. Report that's ascribed to a report, and there's just one rider, over 50 armed groups now in region. Let's leave it there for this Nigeria.
Well, I say miraculous crash in Lagos, as it has been described, is of course the big story on the front page of the Vanguard, or rather the big pictures on the front page of the Vanguard. But the big story is on the NLC protests, and of course you can see it right there. All of the riders, the different angles to it. But see this one, it's a rider. It is police constitutional duty to protect Nigerians, NLC. And I believe that's perhaps in response to the IGP's warning against violent protests. I think it's important to say that, well, I don't think the police have said they should not protest. But just in case, you know how these things go, it's important to, stamp your feet on this one. So we'll see how it plays out. Of course, Channels Television will be giving you live updates from across the country, so stay right here. And from Benue State, you see this one, Benue announces 15,000 and 100,000 allowances for corps members and doctors, so good news, you might say. But there's still a lot to discuss on the program this morning, but let's leave it there. For the dailies. By the way, that forex scarcity also makes its way to the front page. But that's it with a look at some of the dailies this morning. We're back with the big story of the day. You don't want to miss this, so please stay with us.
Members of the Presidential Steering Committee on Palliatives on Monday evening leaving the room after adjourning the meeting to watch the national broadcast by President Bola Tinubu.
We are going to spend 75 billion between July 2023 and March 2024.
Tuesday afternoon, members of the committee reconvene to continue their meeting. Hours later, they conclude, and what they agree on appears to be in favor of the nation.
We appealed to Labour. We did appeal to Labour to call off their protest for tomorrow. We found listening ears here, and they did agree that they all accepted that Mr. President's broadcast was a welcome development, and that they'll go back home to talk to the other leaders that are not present today. So we're hopeful that they will do the right thing and call off the strike tomorrow.
The Labour leaders highlight what seems to be their own angle to the agreement.
The government team told us that what the president has put on the table, it's more or less like a starting point and it's a baseline. So we, on our part, also said yes, that we would have been a bit surprised if that is everything that will be put forward, because for us, we felt that there are some gaps. For us, we felt that if the president has said that 1 trillion naira has been saved in the last 2 months, that what has been proposed is not far-reaching, and that for us, as part of the principle of negotiations, when anything is put on the table, you accept, but you push for more. You ask something about the protest. Yes, they also appealed that we should shelve the protest. Our response was that we are going to go back this evening and also have a conversation around that, and you will hear from us at the end of that conversation.
The government came with an appeal of shifting the intended protest tomorrow. We said, no, this is not something that for us to discuss here, because we have other organs of the union that we had to go back and look at it critically, because the truth is that the truth remains facts that every Nigerian out there is waiting, boiling out there to see what will come out of this very meeting. And we had to go back and maybe make presentation to them that this is what government have said and this is what we are thinking we should go about it. So this is the situation we are now.
It's now a waiting game with all eyes on organized labor to see what their next move will be. Lanre Lasese, Channels Television News.
So welcome back. Quite a number of things happening, so quick and fast. But after the president's speech, Labour did put up a statement which many may have been aware of. So that statement, which was put up on the 31st of July, they titled President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's speech, not the silver bullet that Nigerians expected. And then they started out by saying, our review of today's broadcast by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu leaves us with the impression that the promises and assurances made by President Tinubu is not the silver bullet that Nigerians expected. The speech indeed appears to be out of touch with reality and anomalous with the hardship and suffering that most Nigerians are going through now. And then, if I can just fast forward to the second to the last paragraph there, which says, for many Nigerians, it is incomprehensible that the principal actors in the current government, including Mr. President himself, were clear in 2012 on the need to tackle the fundamental issues that brought about petrol subsidy. Those issues included the failure of previous governments to repair our national refineries and bring those behind the monumental subsidy sleaze to book. Today, these issues are swept under the carpet in President Tinubu's speech. Nigerians wonder what has changed. Well, not long after that, several messages went through that Labour may have put the planned protest in abeyance, but they came up much later and then say they are going ahead with the protest, and they went ahead and listed their demands, which you you could see there. We'll go over them in the course of the program and as we progress. But we're joined now by two gentlemen to take a look at first some of the highlights of the president's speech. But first off will be what may be happening or what will be happening today, as Labour has maintained. Amaechi Asuguni is a former vice president of Nigeria Labour Congress. He joins us virtually from Port Harcourt. We also have Mr. Muda Yusuf, founder, CEO, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, also joining us virtually. He will shed light on those palliatives, if they could have some impact at all, or what kind of impact will they have. Gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for joining us on the program today.
Yeah, good morning, Chairman.
All right, comrade, let me begin with you. All eyes will be on Labour across the country to see how do they proceed with all of this. But the government also had that meeting with Labour. Many suggest that they are reaching out, making efforts to ensure they at least meet Labour's demand, and something, those efforts may or should count for something. But from Labour's standpoint, maintaining that this protest will go on suggests no, it doesn't. So what can you tell us about the current situation this morning? From what you said, it appears the protest will go on. So, one, is that going to go on in spite of all entreaties from the government?
First, for purposes of clarity, I am the former deputy president of Nigeria Labour Congress, though I was vice president, but later became deputy. Then I will quickly say that the NLC action is irreversible to the best of my knowledge, even as of this morning. Workers are assembling at the centers, the pick-up point for the action. And I think government should pay more attention to the substance. The issue resulting to this protest should actually be attracting government than the protests of today or a few days. Because if we just look at Labour, we may be missing it. Don't forget, the population of Nigeria is over 200 million. Labour constitutes less than 15 million or so. So when you are addressing Labour and you forget that the subject matter is beyond the working people, these are salary earners. And then the attention even should be on more Nigeria. In fact, the government is even lucky that it's organized Labour that is planning protests, meaning the protest itself is organized. So we don't go back to where pocket of Nigerians who also have right to protest begin to institutionalize this kind of legitimate right of theirs, and then it may go out of control. So I think today is, for me, the Labour has made it a warning protest. Counting the one today is after today, we will not know whether it's escalating beyond 1 day, because they were not specific about days for the protest. But I know very well that the protest will go.
So is that to suggest that all of the meetings that has held between Labour and government didn't count for anything?
Yes, I think during the meeting, Labour tried to also bring alternative so that we are not just meeting for seeking government presentation. Labour also presented alternative like the compressed natural gas, the CNG stuff, which has been proven to be efficient alternative to petrol. But unfortunately, some of the effort made by government is more or less targeting infrastructure, targeting. If you watch Mr. President's speech the other day, that should be a summary of their response to Labour, and take the outcome of that speech as summary as the response to Labour. You will now know that the issue in question is not being addressed. But the cost of the hardship Nigerians are facing now is the removal of subsidy. And you have removed subsidy, no plan to put refineries to work, and in all the speech tests of Mr. President, we didn't see any paragraph that suggests that refinery will work in Nigeria. So for me, any palliative that is not considering refineries' functionability is more or less too temporary and will not survive the hardship it cannot cure the hardship we are facing now. And as such, Labour is feeling unsettled. Labour is under pressure by members. Labour believe that if they don't do anything now, Nigerians may do it on their own.
These demands of Labour, immediate implementation in good faith of the resolutions with Congress jointly signed with government and TUC, immediate reversal of all anti-poor policies of government, including the recent hike in PMS price, school fees and VAT, fix our local refineries in Port Harcourt, Warri and Kaduna, release of 8 months withheld salaries of university lecturers and workers, accord appropriate recognition and support to the Presidential Steering Committee and the work of its subcommittees to put a stop to inhuman actions and policies of government. Well, the first two, you want immediate implementation. But about, okay, now you say including the recent hike in PMS. I know we spoke to the president of TUC some time ago where we did ask him, because that's part of what it was a first on TUC's demands. I would say, look, hasn't the horse bolted from the stable? Because if it's market forces that determine the prices, and he somewhat was passive, saying, well, yes, we realize that. But bringing it back here, does Labour actually think that government will revert and get back to the initial price? Because if you go down memory lane in history, that has never happened.
Yes, even Labour cannot be demanding for price to more or less status quo bearing. But the question is, if truly every Nigerian would be actually give their consent to removal of subsidy, if there is no concrete plan that suggests that government, in fact, if government is saying we no longer participate in the refinery functionability, we want private sectors to take over the sector in order that Nigerians' need will be met quickly. Because products that are in the public space are far cheaper than where government is involved. If that is their weakness, that government can no longer participate in the business, which investor are they now attracting to the sector? If not for Dangote, that people are still believing that only Dangote can survive the supply of Nigeria. That is not true. That is just making one man to actually inherit what few persons were sharing. And it's unacceptable because Nigeria cannot subject itself to one-man market. Okay. That kind of monopoly is no longer friendly anywhere in the world. So you are not making the atmosphere friendly. You are not participating. It means that something is fundamentally wrong.
Well, Mr. Yusuf, while some Nigerians are trying to digest the highlights of the president's speech concerning palliatives, others don't know what to make of it all, even with the planned protests of Labour, they say starting today, wondering if it will continue or suggesting that it may continue after today. Give us your impression. What do you make of all that is playing out?
Well, thank you very much. The nature of protests is such that most times you cannot predict how it will end because Labour was not specific about the number of days. And from experience, the longer the number of days, the greater the risk of losing control of the whole protests. And we know what the consequences are for businesses, especially small businesses. In commercial cities like Lagos and many other parts of the country, most Nigerians, particularly those in the small business space and those who are in the informal economy, they live practically on daily income. So if you have this kind of disruption, it will disrupt their activities, it will disrupt their incomes. And it doesn't take too much time for them to run completely out of money. And when things get to that point, you begin to see all manner of behaviors which could do a lot more damage, even to the citizens that we are trying to protect. So making the protest peaceful and keeping it as short as possible, I think is something that we need to stress in the interest of everybody, both of the economy and the citizens themselves. Of course, that will not diminish the effectiveness of the messaging that Labour is trying to put forward. The President has responded. Of course, he outlined quite a number of interventions, which are lightly monetary anyway, which of course will bring some succor, which may not be very immediate. But my impression is that as they progress with the engagement, and I hope the engagement could also be accelerated, because if they had moved faster with the engagement, I'm sure we will not be where we are today. So if we go further and expand the scope of engagement to address many other issues that have been raised by Labour, I think that will help. Now we have seen intervention in the finance space, given concessional credits, which is, of course, very significant. The President is talking about 9% credit facility for small businesses, for medium businesses. 9% is highly concessionary because monetary policy rate now is 18.75. So if any business has the opportunity of a 9% interest, I think that is significant. Then the tenure of the funds that is being proposed now, we are talking of a tenure of almost 5 years, 60 months. You hardly can get that in any financial, any bank, any commercial bank. That is also significant. But I also take the point that in terms of the immediate issues, I think it is also important that government prioritizes its focus, because the immediate issues are really the issues of the high cost of food, the high cost of transportation, and of course the high cost of energy. And I must say that all over the world, government gives subsidies in various areas. So subsidy in itself is not a bad thing. What is bad is our own version of subsidy, which of course we all know the kind of damage it has done to the economy. So you can go back and refine that and come back with other forms of subsidy in the area of energy, in the area of transportation, in the area of health, in the area of education. You know, this and of course in the area of food. Last year, 2022, globally, there was a subsidy of $1 trillion on energy, on fossil fuel specifically. You know, so that shows that even across the world, it's the same thing we have with farm subsidies in Europe, in America, the same thing with transport subsidies. All these things exist to protect the interests of the vulnerable segments of the society. That is the whole concept. And what the government is doing is to move away from this kind of subsidy that is vulnerable to abuse and to a lot of bleeding, and refocus it on something that is more beneficial. So it is that process that requires a much more robust engagement. Then there is also the policy approach to subsidy, because of to palliatives. Because it is not everything that is actually about giving money. And we all know, you know, the challenges is part of the world when it comes to distributing money or distributing incentives. So it should also be looking, in addition to what the President has said, it should be looking in the direction of using policies, you know, tax incentives, tax breaks, fiscal policy incentives, tariff incentives, trade policy reviews. The policy approach is also very, very significant, and it's of course more systemic. And some of them can give even much quicker results. And it incentivizes the private sector to complement the efforts of governments to bring relief to the citizens. And let me give you an example. Right now, the import duty on buses and things like that is anywhere between 25 to 30%. So if the government comes up, for instance, with a 50% reduction in import duty on buses and all these smaller vehicles and all of that, the private sector on their own will respond. Companies will be able to buy more buses for their staff. The transporters will be able to buy more buses and put on the road. State governments will be able to buy more buses. Local government will be able to buy more because they become cheaper. So we should be looking at also policy options in the delivery of these palliatives. The same thing can happen in the area of taxation. The same thing can happen in the area of our trade policy.
So for you, Mr. Yusuf, there is still many more room for implementation of policies. Is that what you're saying, essentially?
Exactly. There's a lot of room. There's a lot of room because what the government has done is good, but, deploying policy, because policies has systemic impact. It affects everybody, So that is the point I'm making. There's a whole lot of room to use policies, to achieve some of these results. But this will come from, this continuous engagement with labor and other stakeholders in the economy.
You have expressed you've expressed some of the concerns that people usually have about how protests could affect, especially when they go on for a little longer, how they can affect small businesses and the fears that small business owners could have, especially those who earn their income on a daily basis. What other concerns do you have, apart from that, for small businesses? Do you have any, given the current climate that we're in, with Labour embarking on a protest today, or do you think that this is absolutely necessary?
No, the concerns I have is that, many times these things are difficult to manage when it begins to expand. Yes, the police have said they are going to do a few things and all of that. But this is a very big country. And we have an experience, something, like the NSAS and all of that. We all know how overstretched the security agencies are. So the concerns I have is the risk of massive disruption of both the economic and the social environment, which will not be in the interest of anybody. I'm sure Labour too is not looking forward to a situation where there will be complete breakdown of law and order, so much that even innocent people will now begin to suffer. So that is why it's important to keep it short and have, of course, effective messaging, and so that we can move on with the engagement with the stakeholders and with Labour.
Comrade Asogwoni, is this just, for some people, they're looking at this protest. Well, Labour insists or continues to say it's a rally. They've said if they organize a rally, they can go on. Nothing stops their rally, and they've mobilized their members in many parts of the country. But, I'm looking at the message which they sent much later to reiterate, the fact that I'm reluctant on what word to use now, but looking at the statements, it simply says protest. It says we have neither reconsidered nor suspended the nationwide mass protests. So it does appear that right now, even though the Comrade President had used the word rally in the engagement with the government, this letter says very clearly what this is about. This is no rally. This is a protest. Is this just about a show of force on the part of Labour? Because people know that at the end of the day, you're still going to go back to negotiation. Labour is currently in negotiation with government. So there are a little amiss as to what this is about. Is this just a show of force on the part of Labour? Comrade, if you can hear me, please kindly unmute. I can't hear anything you've said, sir.
Yes, sorry. I just mentioned that protest in itself is a petition. So what Labour is doing is actually re-expressing itself to the extent that they are not satisfied with the approach of government so far on the matter. When you are in a negotiation and the other party keep repeating himself on a daily basis, not providing any kind of solution that suggests that the outcome will actually be win-win, then one party will seem more disturbed because as far as we are concerned, federal government believe subsidy is gone. Labour also believe that the hardship is continuing. And then in the midst of this hardship, what do they do? So I think Labour is more pressured than anybody else in Nigeria. So in the face of the negotiation, they are not seeing any plus. And I tell you, when it goes this way, their silence may mean defeat to their members. So they're coming to show this kind of expression to the public, to the world, even to the government itself, because Mr. President is not there in the meeting. So what they are also doing is for President to know that whoever you are sending to this meeting has not represented well to the extent of meeting the demand of Nigerians. And it's not just Labour, it's about the country interest. And whatever we do, no matter the consequence protest tends to actually present, we should also be looking at the consequence of government action. Because whatever that happens afterward is caused by government. I believe there's no smoke without fire. And therefore, what has happened that is leading to this continuous hike in petrol price has affected everything in the market. Even business owners, no matter how they are not also selling at the point the turnover they actually would make in a day is no longer coming because no money to patronize. I believe everybody is in this jeopardy, and the area we are collective in saying this truth, it will be better for Nigerians, because even when government try to bring the option of, no matter the number of vehicles government may even want to participate to roll out to the road, the question is, where would they get their own fuel? They will still buy their fuel at that same price. And it means the price will still be high, because if it is not refined in Nigeria to the extent that you domesticate that product and use Nigerian currency to determine the price, you cannot get it fair. So the protest of today is, for me, it's overdue. And I also thank them for the wisdom to use protest to initiate this warning and then come back to the table and see how government will change their own scheme of negotiation. Because the scheme of calm down is actually not a good way to address economic issue, because we're referring to action of government that has triggered poverty. And then Labour is even helping the populace, because Labour, they're earning salary. One of the conditions Labour gave to federal government is that whatever palliative you are bringing, even though we don't believe in this monetary palliative that is too temporal, don't consider to give that palliative to salary earners. For me, it's a plus on the side of Labour to tell government not to consider those that are income earners in the scheme of that palliative, so that we now know what kind of criteria are they using to actually capture the real population that is affected by this action of subsidy removal. Because if you do it from the normal pattern they used to engage, eventually the same people that are working, the same people that are controlling the scheme will pack everything to themselves. So it shouldn't be a source of...
What I get from what you said is that the NLC, that's Labour, is doing this as a result of pressure. They feel under pressure to do this. Is that correct?
In addition to pressure, they are not satisfied with the outcome so far in this meeting.
Well, there's also the part of principle which you've raised. I think my colleague Chimley raised that with you. I didn't quite hear what your response to that was when he looked at some of the demands that Labour is making, talking about anti-poor policy, including the recent hike in PMS price. So there'll be questions as to whether or not Labour is with government on the removal of petrol subsidy. And I think when we say Labour, oftentimes I think we need to, in this case, I need to be very specific, the NLC, because it would seem that before now, other Labour unions, for instance, the Pengasen had, advocated for the removal of subsidies so that their own sector can, fully take off. So I really want to know whether Labour really understands or is with government with this question of removal of petrol subsidy.
Yes, NLC was the first to initiate subsidy removal with a very key condition to making refineries work. It is that condition that federal government don't want to hear. If not, NLC has been making this agitation of subsidy removal. It's a scam. It's even it's deepening the poverty state of Nigerians. And therefore, use the available resources you have. Rechannel your resources to make refineries work. Because these refineries have been in place. Workers have been paid salaries in respect of these refineries. So what are they producing? If we are not productive conscious to the extent that we know that refineries that are meant to work are not working, and we are doing nothing, it will raise suspiciousness. So I think energy should also be focused. Why is Mr. President not saying anything about refinery? He should even tell us his reason. If he does not believe in government participation in the business anymore, then tell Nigerians the alternative to it. But to say we will not attempt to refining this our crude locally in Nigeria, the protest will be endless. Even when Nigeria Labour Congress failed to do it right, I bet Nigerians one day a group will legitimately engage to ensure that this protest is exercised. So it goes beyond NLC and federal government. It's about Nigeria versus government. So for me, NLC believe subsidy should be removed on the condition that refineries will work in Nigeria, not at the expense of importation.
Well, I said this to my colleagues in Lagos who also have questions for you.
Well, thank you, Mark. But indeed, but let's begin with this update from Kano State, still about the protests. And we have images coming in from Kano State where there's heavy security presence as labor union members begin to gather for a peaceful protest in that state, northwest Nigeria. Well, the protest is expected to begin now from the Kano State Library down to the Kano State Government House. I think there had been a release put out that the protest will begin 7 a.m., but they're gathering now, as you can see images right there. And of course, we're across the country to bring you images, live images from the protest spots across the country. But what you're seeing is from Kano State, where there's heavy security presence as labor union members begin to gather for peaceful protest in that state. All right, let me come to Mr. Yusuf now and just ask. So Labour is asking that refineries be fixed. In fact, it's one of the demands that has been consistent. 2 months ago, about this time, they were meant to go on a protest as well. I think it was on June the 7th. But eventually we had that meeting and there was this agreement signed by the TUC, the NLC, and representative of the federal government. And, you know, the refinery bit was there. I think there were about, 7 demands or thereabouts. In the president's speech, he referred to or he referenced at least 4 of those demands in his speech, but he left out the refineries, as has been said. But he also made that statement about saving 1 trillion naira as a result of the removal of fuel subsidy. A lot of people are asking, does it mean cash, real cash at hand? Or he's trying to say that where we will have spent 1 trillion naira, which we didn't have anyway, on subsidies. But now that Labour is saying immediate fixing of refineries should work. In terms of the economic angle, let's imagine this is a business decision that the government should make. Would you advise subsidies should continue? Because Labour is saying there should be a reversal of the hike in fuel price. Subsidies continue and government should fix the refineries. Does that make economic sense? I hope this is coming across well.
Well, it makes sense to, stress the importance of refining petroleum products locally. It gives us a lot of savings. It creates a lot of jobs, and it also helps to, provide a lot of feedstock to our manufacturing sector. But the challenge with the structure of refining up until now has been that the refineries are being managed by the public sector. They are managed by bureaucrats, they are managed by politicians. So rather than the refineries being an asset to the country, the refineries have become a huge liability to the country. And that is what actually brought us to where we are today. So the only way out is to ensure that we attract private capital, private sector expertise in management into the refining process, both in terms of attracting new investors into the refineries and also about ensuring that even the existing ones are done perhaps within a framework of public-private partnership. Because if you continue to say that the refineries will work under the previous dispensation, and don't forget, with the kind of subsidy we were running, there was no way that we can get private capital into that space. So if you are not getting private capital or private investors into refineries, if the public sector people that are managing the refineries don't have the capacity to manage it, is that not a crisis for us as a country?
Pardon me, Mr. Yusuf. I just want to follow up on this. Pardon me, Dr. Muda Yusuf.
The president was saying.
Right. Just quickly, I wanted to clarify the question. I'm asking, can we eat our cake and have it? Because Labour is asking for immediate reversal of the hike in petrol price, essentially meaning that subsidy should return. Labour is also asking that our local refineries be fixed. And I imagine it's still within the same funds available, perhaps 1 trillion naira, which we're not clear anyway if it's cash at hand. So can we eat our cake and have it? So keep subsidizing petrol as Labour demands while we're fixing refineries as well?
No, certainly not. But my understanding of what Labour is talking about is the last component of the hike in petrol price. You know, when the initial announcement was made, there was a movement to between 490 to 500 or so. So there was an engagement, there was a meeting. While that was going on, NNPC announced a further increase. I think that is what actually provoked, some of these reactions. So my understanding is that Labour is asking that we should go back to where it was before the latest increase, while the engagement continues. And when the president was talking, because it's also not correct to say that the government is not doing anything about the refineries. If you look at the Petroleum Industry Act, part of the provisions in that act is to ensure a total reform and transformation of the oil and gas sector. And I've seen a document on this oil and gas advisory committee set up by the president, which has a wide-ranging level of reforms with timelines. Although the president did not elaborate on that in the speech, but it's also not correct to say that nothing is being done in that space. This reform is also part of the process to revamp the whole refineries and to ensure that you have more private investors in that space. But to say that the refineries has to work under the previous dispensation is to continue to waste valuable resources of the government and of the people.
Okay.
And the president said in his speech, I'm not holding brief, that he was running away from jargons, market forces, GDP, and so on.
Right.
That if there is need to intervene, that the government will intervene, either in terms of this capping this oil price, this fuel price, or even the foreign exchange market.
Okay.
He said the government was ready to intervene.
Yeah, indeed,
so that we don't leave
came out
to market forces.
I mean, that part of the speech came out, and a lot of people held on to it. But as you said, it was conditional. There was if we need to intervene. So it's not quite clear that government will indeed. But quickly, let me ask Mr. Suguni, because you've raised some major issues. So for Dr. Yusuf, we certainly cannot eat our cake and have it regarding reversing the price, or at least cutting it down, returning some sort of subsidies while we're trying to fix the refineries as well. And I want to ask you, so what do you think the president or this government can do much more than what it has done, or at least in the speech of the president, that can further assuage labor? So we're clear on what the expectations are. So if we see it, we know that, okay, this is what labor wants, and government is indeed doing it. What more do you expect from government?
I think my focus is on what government is not doing. In as much we appreciate the little effort by coming to at least raise this concern with us that they feel the pains of Nigeria. Mr. President did acknowledge that. But the question is, where is the template for the program that will actually deliver this country from the quagmire we find ourselves? There's no template. So anytime you have a negotiation and there is no template from government as an employer of labor to show that to reform the petroleum sector, that is a long-term program that you need to define what will happen now at the short time. You need to also tell us what Nigerians tends to get in 2-3 years to come. Labor that is saying reverse. Why labor is saying reverse is because they are not seeing any template. If you tell me that you have removed this with the preparation to achieve this, and I see the process engaged, there's no way this protest will be necessary. But labor is sensing that nothing is being done from the back. But it seems they are doing more on the table.
Yes.
Well, Comrade Asuguni, if I could follow up on that, you have rightly noted that Mr. President's intervention in his speech reflects that indeed he feels the pains of the people. And if that is the case, really, would it be right for Labour to continue with this mass action, knowing that in some states there are plans already to, to roll out the palliatives? In fact, some have rolled out, and I can mention a few. Buses have been released in Rivers State. Ogun State has also rolled out a number of palliatives. And in Lagos, by tomorrow, in line with, or in fact today, the 2nd of August, in line with what the governor said, the commencement of reduction in transport fare has begun for both the private, for both the yellow buses and the government high-capacity buses. So doesn't this show government's good intention and the need for Labour to return to the negotiation table rather than the mass action?
In fact, the palliative itself calls for questioning. Even when states are actually trying to show support to Mr. President, it becomes more political and almost with no vision. That you set up a temporary palliative with no program in place to overtake the palliative. So how would people trust this kind of scheme? So the palliative they are doing now, in as much I appreciate Mr. President, who also want to employ the scheme of using the state, who may eventually use local government to get to the communities, unlike before, where people will sit in Abuja and they write a long list and apportion naira to it, and then somebody has become a billionaire. Now you want to involve the state to involve the communities. We don't have a problem with that. The question is, the palliative, how effective is the palliative? It's not viable, it's not reliable, it's not guided. And so it's unrefined. Because it's like somebody saying, there is fire, just pour water and quench fire. Because of the hike in price of goods today, it's not being addressed. So even when you give money to the people, the same money you would have used to cure the palliative is the same money you are giving temporarily to few Nigerians.
So, Comrade Asuguni, Comrade, what approach would you rather have the government adopt in implementing the palliative program across the states?
If that would have come first, would have been initiation of very cogent program with regards to making our refineries work. And like our friend said, if government participation is even the key problem we have, then the question is, what effort is government making to even bring investors? You must play one of the roles. Assuming one of the recent trip of Mr. President was to actually partner with ABC to come into Nigeria, and like they did in the communication industry. And today, communication is as cheap as anybody can afford it in Nigeria. If that was the agenda...
Comrade, you're talking about... Pardon me, Comrade Asuguni, if you can hear me. You're talking about the refinery. Some will say that's in the long term. I'm talking about the palliatives. What approach would you rather have the government adopt in implementing the palliatives? If you say that it's political and, you know, it's not going to achieve anything, some are going to become rich by it, what approach would you, you know, require that the government adopt such that it can get to the vulnerable that really need it?
Yes, the approach they can employ, because they've made up their mind to go in that route. The question is, they should involve the community. The community leaders should be involved. In fact, if you leave me, I would say traditional rulers should be engaged in this process in such a way that names of Nigerians from rural areas who are not working, because we have issue with data. Because of the data problem of this country, you can see somebody's name can appear twice. So if they can employ the NIN, the BVM processes, every other identity, digital identity system that could stop duplication and then ensure that the rural area is the target for this action, it will help. But I still have issues because the people that are working are also using their salary, larger part of their salaries now for transportation. And it calls for a bigger problem because, so the palliative scheme should focus on the rural areas, but at the same time, what must you do, urban city, to actually cushion the effect of the removal of subsidy, where the consumption of petrol is actually high.
All right. A very quick one, just before we exit this segment. Comrade, there are reports that in some states they will not be joining today's mass action, perhaps because of the signal that some palliative programs are beginning to be implemented in those states. What does this say about, you know, the labor movement's strength to proceed with the other key demands that it has tabled before government in its negotiation?
Yeah, you know, when protests of this nature is launched, it does not matter the state that fails to join the protest on the first day. If peradventure it continues tomorrow, the state will be, don't forget, NLC is an institution that have a constitution, and therefore no member can actually violate the decision of their National Executive Council because it would have been a collective decision. So anybody who try to skip decision of organ may be penalized along the line, and somebody else may do the job that any chairman has failed to do. So for me, issue of compliance is constant. The effectiveness of the protest can be measured as they progress. And that is why the earlier government respond to them better for me, because if we watch to see the consequence, it may eventually announce more than we plan to see. All right. So I think the action should be respected by responding effectively by government.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Soguni. On a final note, Dr. Yusuf, your closing thoughts on this. I mean, there's the labor angle. Labor, for some people, represents just a little percentage of the Nigerian population, but there's also the bigger picture. What will be your closing thoughts on this, Dr. Yusuf?
Well, my advice would be that we need to accelerate the process of engagement with labor and other critical stakeholders. We need to prioritize the key pain points that Nigerians are worried about, namely the high cost of food, the high cost of energy, and the high cost of transportation. And we need to also partner with stakeholders in the private sector, you know, to deliver on all these areas. Stakeholders in the agricultural sector, which the president alluded to, that there's already an engagement. We have private sector stakeholders in the transport sector. Government will engage with them on what kind of policies government can give them for them to also bring some value to this process. We should also have stakeholders engagement in the energy sector, because we cannot have an open-ended approach to these market forces.
Right.
You know, which is, I think, part of the things the president was alluding to.
Indeed.
That's a point we get to, that you have to apply a brake in the use of these market forces because of the social implications, you know, of some of these things. So engagement is key.
Indeed.
Beyond labor, stakeholders in the private sector need to be engaged to see how the private sector can also support the government, to reduce this pressure.
And that's a fine place to leave it. Dr. Muda Yusuf, who's the founder and CEO of the CPP, that's a Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise. Thank you so much for your time, as well as Mr. Amechi Azogune, who is a former Vice President of the NLC. Gentlemen, we appreciate your time on the program this morning. Well, we'll take a break now, and when we return, still other major issues to focus on, not forgetting that we're bringing you live updates from across the country as Labour protests this morning. Stay with us.
Lawyers in the petition of the People's Democratic Party and its presidential candidate, Atiku Abubakar, converged on the courtroom at the Presidential Election Petition Court for the adoption of final written address. This is the last leg before judgment is delivered. Atiku Abubakar, alongside his entourage, is physically present to witness the day's proceedings. At the resumed hearing, Mr. Atiku, through his lawyer, Chris Uche, alleges that despite the 355 billion naira received for the conduct of the election, INEC deliberately bypassed all the technological innovations it introduced for the purpose of the 2023 general elections. They contended that INEC acted in breach of the amended Electoral Act when it refused to electronically transmit results of the presidential election. However, all the respondents, through their lawyers, prayed the court to dismiss the petition as grossly lacking in merit. INEC, through its legal team, led by Mr. Abubakar Mahmood, maintains that contrary to claims by the petitioner, the glitch experienced during the election was not a deliberate human interference to manipulate results. President Tinubu's lawyer, Wole Olanipekun, argues that the petitioners failed to establish why the presidential election should be nullified. He described Atiku as a meddlesome interloper, only challenging the conduct of INEC and not making a case against the declared winner. After it had listened to all the parties, the Justice Amani-led panel reserved judgment to a date that will be communicated to other parties.
As you can see today, we all adopted our final written addresses, which are our final submissions in this case, summarizing all the evidence we tendered before the court. You saw all the witnesses we called, all the exhibits we tendered. So today, we now summarized and adopted our submissions.
Next case is the petition of the Labour Party. The presidential candidate of the party, Mr. Peter Obi, alongside his running mate, Dati Baba Ahmed and Chimamanda Adichie, are physically present. On the issue of non-compliance, lawyer for INEC, Abubakar Mahmood, said the respondents misunderstood what was introduced and the purpose. He further asked that the over 18,000 blood results uploaded on the portal is a non-issue. He did not suggest that the physical copies of the results were also blood. On the issue of the 25% in Abuja, Mahmood says using it as a yardstick to nullify an election is giving it an undue elevation above other states. While adopting their final written address, lawyers to President Tinubu, Wole Olanipekun, and the APC, Lateef Fagbemi, held that Peter Obi should not participate in the rerun election should the court grant the prayers of the petitioners because he came third in the presidential election. While adopting his final written address, lawyer to Peter Obi, Levi Uzuaku, held that the respondents have labored in vain to degrade the importance of their IREV.
There are so many grounds we presented. So it's for the courts to decide. So, but what is important is that we sufficiently presented our case in a most convincing manner.
The wait is now on as the Presidential Election Petition Court adjourns hearing on the petitions of the Labour Party, the PDP, and the APM for a date to be announced later to determine the fate of President Bola Tinubu on his victory at the presidential election. From the Presidential Election Petition Court, Emanuela Ekele, Channels Television News.
Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Well, yes, indeed, we'll talk about that and more. And we do have Usman Johnson, who is a senior advocate of Nigeria, to guide us through what's going on in different parts of the country on that matter. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today.
My pleasure.
Well, as you're well aware, protests across the country happening today concerning fuel subsidy removal, labor, civil society, just trying to see how they could press home their demands and their points. But before we come to that particular matter, let me just give our viewers this update. In Ogun, we understand that members of labor and civil society are all gathered there waiting for further directive from the Secretariat of the Labor in Abeokuta. So the leaders are going to commence a peaceful protest over fuel subsidy removal, as Labor had said previously. But, excuse me, also in Abuja, the current state of affairs at the Unity Fountain, that's where organized labor is expected to kick off their protest from. The president of the Labour Congress, Comrade Joe Ajero, and a handful of members are on ground. Some officials of TUC from the FCT are also there. So we also noticed a sizable number of security presence comprising the DSS, the police, who themselves had issued a statement cautioning against violent protests, as it was. So we're keeping tabs, scouting different parts of the country to bring you updates as we get them about the protest happening in different parts of the country today. But back to you, Mr. Johnson. All eyes are on the courts now to see what exactly will happen. So just explain to those who may not have been following all of this from the get-go. Yes, they adopted the final brief. So what procedurally is expected to happen next?
Well, thank you for having me this morning. It is important to state that presentation of election petition is provided for by the Electoral Act 2022 by Section 133, who can present a petition. Sub 1 said a candidate who contested the election or his party. These are the two people who can present election petition. And then you move from there, you go to the grounds of the petition. Section 134 stated the grounds upon which an election petition can be presented. That is, the person who was declared as a winner was not qualified to contest, the election was marred by non-compliance or corrupt practice, or that the person who was returned did not win the election by a majority of lawful vote. These are the grounds of the petition. Now, when you file the petition, the person who filed the petition is called the petitioner, or the petitioners as the case may be. And then the person whose election is being challenged is called the respondent. In most cases, the winner of the election is political party and INEC. These are the respondents. The statutory, we call them the statutory respondents. From there, you move to the roles of the respondents. Upon being served with the petition, the respondents are duty-bound, if they want to defend the election, to file what is called a reply. Now, upon serving the petitioners their replies, the petitioner, under the practice direction, is again duty-bound to file a reply to the reply, if there is need for it. That is, where the respondents, in replying to the petition, has raised some issues that were not covered by the petitioner's pleadings, then the petitioner has the duty to respond to them. When you are done with this, you now go to the stage called the pre-hearing stage. It's provided for in paragraph 18 of the first schedule to the Electoral Act. This session is where both the courts and the parties come together to agree on what is the dispute between the parties. What are the documents that parties seek to rely on? What are the disputes relating to those documents? Are there documents that can be consented to and be tendered at that stage? Now, it's a preliminary stage that so many issues, preliminary issues, are thrashed out. And the reason for this is to fast-track the hearing of the petition, avoid wasting time, avoid wasting energy. So at that point, the matters between the parties are narrowed down. That is the pre-hearing stage. From the pre-hearing stage, upon the conclusion of pre-hearing stage, then you go to trial. The at the preliminary stage, you know how many witnesses the petitioners want to call, what are the documents he wants to tender, how many days he required. On the other hand, the respondents, how many witnesses are you calling? How many documents are you tendering? Are we consenting to the tendering of this document? If the answer is in the positive, then these documents are tendered at that stage. If the answer is in the negative, then the tribunal or the court, as the case may be, may decide that you tender this document. All parties who have objection to this document, you can reserve your objection and be taken in your final address to save time. In some instances, the court will say, no, we'll take objections to this document and we'll reserve the ruling on this document to the final
Mr. Johnson, permit us to hurry this up a bit because, we're pressed for time.
So now, from there, you go to trial and to the written adoption.
So where are we now in the process?
For instance, in the presidential, adoption of written addresses have taken place yesterday. From there, what is left is parties who just, their fate is hanging.
They're waiting for judgment.
Waiting for judgment. Simple.
Yesterday, we heard the judges say they reserved judgment. Yes. What does that mean?
Now, when the court says we reserve judgment, it means we're not giving you a date for the judgment, but we'll communicate the date to you when the judgment is ready.
So, but they'll give you notice to prepare yourself and then come back.
They'll definitely give you notice to come back for a judgment. But at the point of adoption of your address or after the adoption of same, no date is given. So judgment is reserved to a date to be communicated to parties.
So, interesting. So, this presidential election petition for a number of people, all eyes has been on Abuja at the Court of Appeal where the Presidential Election Tribunal. We saw the controversy that initially preceded it as to whether or not it should be broadcast live, etc. And the judges ruled that no, this should happen, without the TV cameras present. But I want to know, because you've enumerated a process through which a presidential or even any election petition has to go through.
Exactly.
And I'm sure a lot of lawyers, not just lawyers, ordinary Nigerians were interested in this as well as lawyers for different reasons. So lawyers, they always look forward to the fireworks. This is no ordinary, because this is the first time we're seeing 3 petitioners, or will I say, 3 of them, as a matter of fact. There was also APM, but 2 primary ones, the PDP and the Labour Party. For you, as a lawyer who's been following this case, what aspects of this trial have you found interesting?
Every aspect.
Every?
Yes, because the petition attracts attention. The 2 petitions you mentioned attract so much attention nationally and internationally. And therefore, you must be keen to know what is happening from the beginning to the end. You discover that at the pre-hearing session, there are a lot of fireworks there as to how many witnesses will be called, how many days each of the parties need to call their witnesses, the documents to be tendered, whether they should be consented to or not. It is a thing of interest.
Is it usually a matter of braggadocio when parties say we're going to call 50 witnesses, 60 witnesses, and then they call only 10, or they call only... What usually happens?
Now, the problem is the law requires that you call a witness from every polling unit you complain of. But in the 2022 Electoral Act, there's a mild amendment that when documents are tendered and or consented to, they may be deemed as read. But the respondents, as usual, will not want to follow that route. So they want the petitioner to bring every witness or witnesses from every polling unit complained of, which is an impossible task.
Okay.
Then when the petitioner says, I have 50 witnesses, most cases, most time, the tribunal will say, no, we don't have time for you to call 50 witnesses. So we are giving you opportunity to call 10. Okay. So it's not a matter of bragado. In so many instances, the petitioner is ready to call his 50 witnesses. But the tribunal will tell you, no, we don't have time for 50 witnesses because we have time. Okay. And then you are limited to 10.
But the APM case, I understand that the parties adopted the addresses on July 14. But the judge, I think the judges, they say, well, they'll give the dates, judgment on the same day. Is that the case?
Yes. The reason is that should not be seen to give a piecemeal judgment. The presidential case centered around only one person. So you cannot be seen to give one. If you give judgment in APM, in which issues are related to PDP and Labour. If the judgment in APM is delivered ahead, of course, the Labour and PDP would have known their fate. So it's better that all the judgments be taken at once. It's prudent and it's commonsensical to do so.
We're using this PEPT as a springboard for all other cases, election petitions across the country.
Yes.
Because lots of people are looking across board to, focusing on the judiciary to see how will they stand the test, because the eye of Nigeria has a huge test for them. But what do lawyers need to do to prove their cases in court, to get the judges to say, well, okay, will we see this? Because in the court of public opinion, you hear all sorts and see all sorts. If someone won and lost their cases there, but in the courts, it's different. Do courts also have, what happens in the court of public opinion? Does it have a bearing on what happens in the court?
Thank you very much, Shambele. In most cases, they are completely irrelevant. What happened in public court, we call them the public courts. Because you say something in the public court, you come to the court of law and present a different evidence. And of course, courts do not give judgment based on sentiment, based on social media reports, but based on cogent and admissible evidence before it. So if you say or you hear something out of the court of law and it's a different thing that is playing out in the court of law, then expect a different judgment. What you need to win your case is evidence. Concrete and admissible evidence, not just evidence. Because evidence may be tendered that is not relevant to your case. Evidence might be tendered that is not pleaded. Evidence might be tendered that has no connection with the case, but it has connection with the court of public opinion. So there are two different things. When you come to the court of law, you discover that there is a world of difference between what you hear outside and what parties present. And therefore, you cannot have the same results, sir.
I know that my colleagues in Lagos will be itching to get a word in, but let me quickly ask you this. As somebody who's also monitoring what is happening nationwide and perhaps might be involved in a matter or two.
Yes, I'm involved in some, by God's grace.
Yeah, do you think that, burden of proof needs to shift on matters of election petition? Do you think that, because oftentimes the petitioners who bring forth the case have been asked to prove their cases, and that's usually the basis upon which law is situated. He who alleges must prove. But do you think that for election petitions, given the unique nature, do you think that they need to change?
Now that is where I need to educate viewers on the burden of proof. There are two types of burden of proof. There is the one that the law says, he that asserts must prove. Now, it's categorized into two. The law says he that asserts the negative cannot prove. Because if I say this thing did not exist, does not exist, I don't have the burden to prove because it's not in existence. But if you, Chamberlain, say, no, it exists, then the burden now shifts to you. So the law is he that asserts the positive must prove, but not he that asserts the negative. Now, in election petition, this is where the real problem is. Because it's a declaratory action, seeking for declaratory relief, and the law is settled that he who comes for declaratory relief must prove his case on the strength of his case, and not on the admission of the defendant. Therefore, it places a lot of burden on the petitioner to prove. You ask a question, should the burden shift to the respondent? In so many instances, I'll say yes. Because if I say election did not take place in a so and so polling unit, what am I going to prove? What am I bringing? If you say it took place, then you must bring voters register, must bring ballot papers from EC8As. You must bring those ones to prove the existence.
So wait, they cannot leverage on pick holes on the defense of the defendant?
No. In declaratory action, there is no. That is where the problem is.
Oh.
Not even on his admission. Not even when he is silent. The law says you must prove your case and succeed on the strength of your case, and not on the admission or on the weakness of the defendant for a declaratory action. An election petition is always a declarative action. Because you are asking, declare me, I won the election.
How big a debate is this amongst lawyers? And, you know, if, I don't know whether they're also going to be applying democratic principles there to see whether majority will carry the day and maybe what action should happen as a result of that.
You see, the Electoral Act undergoes reform and amendment. What we had in 2006 was amended in 2010 for a 2011 election. In 2014, Electoral Act was again amended for 2015 election. In 2015, it was further amended. In 2019, it was further amended. Yeah. Now, in 2022, it is no longer an amendment. What we did was a rehaul of the entire Electoral Act, jettisoning the old one, and then there are a lot of innovations in the 2022 Electoral Act. So I think gradually
we'll get there.
So, but this decision, I mean, by the time the court gives this decision,
yeah,
it's on the final part. There are several stages.
Yes, there are stages.
Appeal.
When it comes to governorship and presidential.
Yeah.
And then there is a stage, another stage, when it has to do with National Assembly and State House of Assembly election, because the appeal from in National Assembly and State House of Assembly election goes to Court of Appeal and it ends there. But for the governorship, it moves from the Tribunal to Court of Appeal to Supreme Court. In the case of the presidential, straight from the Court of Appeal to Supreme Court. So these are the further stages.
Okay. We know you have to run soon, but let's just quickly take a comment or two from our colleagues in Lagos.
All right. Let me just put this in, Mr. Johnson. For the presidential election, we've not seen in Nigeria's recent history, no election has been upturned. Even the 2007 election, that was really controversial. The winner of the election came out to speak about that. It was not upturned. And I'd like to know if you foresee any sort of upset, but more importantly, and I've seen the ways lawyers handle cases. I mean, they say you win some, lose some, and move on. But particularly for the political parties, their supporters, a lot of them are emotionally invested. As has been said, some of them have decided upon the case already. It is either this way or nothing. What do you expect? What kind of messaging do you expect from the political actors, even the lawyers themselves, in this one?
Thank you very much. Already tribunals have started delivering their judgment, and already they are upstate. For instance, in Delta State Tribunal, removed a sitting member and declared Elumelu as the elected member. So that is already an upset. There are other tribunals that have also delivered their judgment. I think in Kaduna State, a sitting member has been removed, and the petitioner was declared as a winner. In other places, respondents were declared to be the winner. So, in all, I think there will be an upset. There's already an upset, and it will continue. But for the presidential, I can't comment because it will be too specific.
Okay. Very quickly from here, just one, and it's also on the burden of proof. I wonder if, during your observations of the proceedings at the PEPC, you saw enough of the use of technology experts, to prove or to disprove cases, particularly as it has to do with the matter of the non-uploading of election results during the presidential election. And of course, on the matter of 18 papers, documents that were blurred in the case of one petitioner. Was there enough use of IT experts to prove cases in this regard?
You are still asking me to comment about the presidential.
Yeah.
I said it is too specific. I am a lawyer, a senior lawyer for that matter, and I won't drag myself into that.
All right. We also know that you do have to run, so we have to thank you for coming on this morning. And all eyes are on the country, yes. Judges across board.
Agreed. And
to see what happens.
Best. They are doing their best. We are pleading with them to do their best.
But this best matter, isn't it subjective? Because the people will decide eventually. Well, look, let's not extend this. I know that we could go on and on of this, Mr. Usman Johnson, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Thank you for coming on, and all the best to you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Let's get to the field. Our correspondent, Dele Omoyeni, is in Abuja. He's in the field where the protest is going on. Dele, good morning, and tell us, yes, we understand that some members of Labour, as we see behind you, NLC president, police. So what can you tell us about what's happening where you are?
The
Okay, so we're going to try and fix the challenge with his sound so that we can bring that to you. But yes, you could see right there that several members of civil society and Labour are already there at the Eagles Fountain. Unity Fountain, pardon me. But remember, the police did issue a statement, which we'll try and ask him to find out what is the response, what is the mood, how are they conducting themselves. The police across board, we've seen police vehicles and personnel in Kano. You saw some of them in Abeokuta, and then in Abuja, where some of our correspondents are across the country. And we're keeping tabs and bringing you all of that to find out, above all else, how you need to conduct yourself when moving. So, but the president of Nigeria Labour Congress, Joe Ajero, speaks now.
Organized by the NLC and TUC might not hold because the federal government made some last-minute, had some last-minute series of meetings with the unions. But here we are at the Unity Fountain. What exactly can you say regarding that?
Well, the protest is on. It has taken off in all the states of the Federation, bearing some constraints, including police, efforts to equally stop it in some areas. But to be candid with you, there's nothing stopping the protest. Not even an overture, a promise, a commitment, or offer from the government. So I don't understand why people feel that it will not hold. The protest is on and it will hold. It is equally, in our own enlightened self-interest to determine, based on the response of the state, whether the protest will be for today or tomorrow or next, or till that kingdom come. It is not by mere using forces to stop people from expressing their views. So we are here for the protest and to make a statement to Nigerians that since we started even negotiation, there is nothing we have in our hands. That is clear.
We appreciate you, and we want to leave it at that until we'll have other opportunity to talk to you later about the process. Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, so there you go. Comments coming through from the president of Nigeria Labour Congress, Comrade Joe Ajero, on what to expect, their perspective. So, will it be just one day? Will it continue tomorrow? So I guess time will tell. But they've lifted the demands, which you have gone through. But I guess we'll wait and see how all of this plays out.
Interestingly, we'll also be waiting for your own messages. I mean, let us know what is happening in your own area. You're going to be joining the protest. I mean, after all, this is also about Labour. And who is Labour if it's not, ordinary folks who have a job? Labour differentiates between organized Labour and, the everyday labourer or the everyday person who has his or her own shop. But this is something that, a lot of people are very concerned about. It involves the whole economy. How are you going to get your voice heard? Are you going to be a part of it? Do you intend to write a petition? Do you intend... What? Just let us know. Are you going to be just monitoring the process? Are you working from home? Whatever the situation is with you today, we're interested. So let us know how you're spending the day. But we do hope that whatever it is you decide to do, please stay safe. Do it safely. And let us remember that at the end of this all, we only have one country. Let us keep that in mind. And we need to work for the preservation and the success and the prosperity and the future of our country.
Yes, indeed. So that is what we'll look out for. How the police conduct themselves is hugely important in this matter, and how we all conduct ourselves is equally important to ensure that we just get things moving in the right direction. Don't forget how government themselves respond is also important. So, that said, we'll just have to go ahead and wish you the very best today and the rest of the week. Of course, we'll be here again tomorrow. We thank you all for letting us be a part of your day today. We'll see you next time. I'm Chamberlain. It'll
be interesting to also see if the National Assembly will continue the ministerial screenings today. Yeah. We'll be keeping tabs on that for you. Thank you for watching. I'm Maokwe Yusuf.
Well, they say eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. So if you're protesting today, be careful. Thank you for watching. I am Bukola Koka.
And just to reiterate, all eyes on the police. Thankfully, when the IGP said there's a lion or tiger in him, he was speaking about criminals, not protesters or the labor. So we'll keep tabs on that. But we wish you all the best this day. Goodbye. I'm Kayode Okikelu.